Welcome, everyone, to the second edition of this Viz Career series brought to you by the Data Visualization Society. My name is Elijah Meeks. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer at a computational notebook company called Notable, and I'm happy to bring you Lisa Mahapatra, a designer at a startup called Flatfile. Lisa, welcome to this interview.
Hi, Elijah. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm
Excited.
so happy to have you here.
See, we didn't rehearse how to not talk over each other, so that's probably going to
That's right.
happen a bunch.
I think it'll happen. It'll happen a bit. It's the modern interview practice where everything is kicked through satellites and there's a delay like you're talking to somebody in Europe 30 years ago. So that's all right. So how are you doing, Lisa? I'm really glad that you could join me here. I've got a lot that I want to talk to you about, but how's the world treating you? Are you enjoying these James Webb telescope pictures on Twitter?
Very much. It's on Twitter, it's on my work Slack, it's on my private Slack. People like to look at stuff.
Great. Yeah, I think that there's some interesting discussions that I've read about all of these astronomical images, because of course that's not the color of them when they come out of the machine. They have to have false color, and there's decisions that are made about how you color them and everything like that. And a future guest of ours who's worked at JPL, she's going to talk a little bit about that, I think, or I'm going to make her talk about it because it's interesting to me. But for you, what I find interesting about the kind of work that you've been doing, and you're sort of positioned as a designer, you've had that we're going to talk about sort of the career journey you've been on. But one of the things that I love the most, and we can just dive right into it, is how you talk about tables. I think that for a lot of folks who are watching this and a lot of folks who are thinking about data visualization, they think about data visualization dominated by these really impressive graphics that have a lot of complex shapes. And then perhaps you might have somebody argue back that these aren't as effective as more traditional explanatory graphics like bar charts and line charts and stuff like that. And you have sort of positioned or taken up a position of arguing for the primacy of the table as the best form of data visualization. So let's just jump right into that. Why do you like tables so much?
They are data visualization number one. I think that a lot of people think of data tables as data itself, which is not true. Data can come in a ton of formats. Some of us are aware of the Kafka database, for example. That is not a table. I think that tables are the first visualization of any sort of data. Usually, if you want to do something with it, if you want to make some sort of decision with it, if you want to turn it into something else, one of the first things you're going to do, whether you're working in Excel or running like looking at data in a Jupyter notebook, you're probably going to create a table of some sort. And that is why I think a table is incredibly powerful. And like I've spent the last 6 years making tables that are optimized to do different things. Every single job I've had as a product designer has involved very heavy data wrangling in tables.
So there's a lot of interesting threads off of that. I'm going to pick one of them first, which is the whole idea of show me the data, right? Every data visualization person has had a stakeholder where you create this beautiful dashboard. You think it's a really effective report. You think that you've got this great custom visualization. And they tell you that, well, that's fine, but show me the data. And what they mean by that is what? A table representation, right?
Because
why do you think that's in their head?
So your every single data visualization requires you to make some assumptions. It requires you to be able to read it. I'm going to talk about how pie charts are bad a little later on, but also pie charts are good. They're good because people understand them. There are very few people who can look at a pie chart and be like, I don't know what's happening. I mean, unless there's like egregious issues with the data or like
right.
or what you put in there, but it is incredibly readable. The table is like even better than a pie chart in some ways in terms of that, because there is not a single person who's looking at a table that doesn't have a very clear way of reading it. Every other visualization requires some degree of interpretation. It requires familiarity with the form. That's why bar charts tend to work better than Sankey's, because Everyone knows how to read a bar chart.
Yeah.
A small percentage of the people who know how to read a bar chart know how to read a Sankey.
Right.
And that's
And
why
so what's interesting here is the other thread that I really wanted to touch on with tables was what you described was the flexibility of the table, right? Because we're talking about visualization and reading, but you also talked about what? Transformation, cleaning. There are aspects of tables where the filtering, the transformation seems to be part of the metaphor already, right? You see very little of this. You see a bit of brushing and things that are integrated into other data visualization forms, but you don't see the high level of flexibility as far as transformation goes with other data visualization forms. And it's not a technical problem, right? It's not like we couldn't build data visualizations that allowed people to edit and transform the data in the same way they do it with tables. It's familiarity. They have worked with spreadsheets or had exposure to them, even in paper form, all their lives, right? So they expect that transformation. So I wonder, what do you think that ability to not only visualize but transform the data does for a user and their sort of the viewpoint that they bring into it when they're exposed to tables?
when we think about beautiful data visualization, we often think about like these beautifully complex finished products by like we talked about Jon Snow's cholera map recently. And you mentioned that the cholera map was made after all of the decisions were made, after all of the insights had already been gleaned from the data. And that's a really great point. It's hard to make beautiful data visualization unless you know what the story is that you're trying to tell.
Right.
Which means if you don't know what story you're trying to tell, a table is a fantastic place to start because you can ask the table questions, you can interrogate it, and it's just
Right.
difficult to do that with a beautiful visual form unless somebody has predetermined what questions they want you to be asking. Um, with a table, that is not true. Anyone can ask the table a question if they are
Yeah.
given the tools to be able to do so and they understand what a question asked of data can look like, which that's the skill here. Like when I think about data literacy, I don't think about being able to read data visualizations. I think about, can you coherently ask a question of this data?
It's a really interesting point because when we're talking about hypothesis generation and validation, or us maybe perhaps less scientific approach that's just more domain expertise getting overviews and trying to glean insights,
Mhm,
that's all pre-decision,
mhm,
right? That's all when we think about impact, we're constantly thinking about, I've got this data display of some sort
mhm,
and I have to make decisions based on it. Do we launch the challenger or not? But there is another class of data visualization and communication itself, which is retrospective,
mhm,
which I think we don't get as much attention to because it is also valuable, right? Like when we talk about, oh, well, the cholera map happened afterward,
mhm,
it's typically used as a criticism of the decision-making value of the map because it wasn't around to make the decision. Neither was the diagram of the airplane that shows where the airplane was shot, right? That was produced long after people had actually figured out that there was survivorship bias
mhm.
in the damaged airplanes.
Absolutely.
But it's really great retrospectively, right? It's really great to sum it up and to explain it to future generations. So I wonder, there's a data literacy aspect to making the decision and reading the chart and being the sort of busy executive who has to figure it
Mhm,
out. And then there's a data literacy aspect to understanding something in a retrospective, right? Like thinking about, well, what did we do right and what did we do wrong? Do you think that there's enough of a distinction between those two that we should treat them as two distinct things to design for? Or do you think this design for each is going to be just as effective?
I think you're optimizing for very different things. In the first case, where it is an exploratory visualization, you don't know what the insights are going to be. You cannot
Yeah,
guide anyone who is using the format to those insights. Whereas the plane with the holes, the classic, like in some ways, that's a great data visualization, and in some ways, it's completely unreadable. It's not a pie chart. What as
right.
like if I'm given a picture, a plane with holes in it, I'm like, Well, that's a plane. It's got holes on it. I don't
Hmm.
know what to make of it. The only
Right.
reason why the plane with the holes is so popular is because it came with a story, and that story was told using words.
Right.
And data visualization for storytelling, it leans extremely heavily on annotation. Data
Yeah.
visualization
Yeah. Yeah.
to glean new insights, there can be no annotation. We don't yet know.
I think that's a really valuable practical distinction,
Mhm.
right? I mean, this is one of the reasons why I wanted to have you in this interview. And for folks who aren't familiar with sort of your work or your background, that uh, you don't deal in sort of generic, like broad sweeping statements. I like that you drill down into that because I agree with you. I think that annotation and text more generally uh, is typically used in the retrospective storytelling form, right? What happened in this event? Let's explain it to you, rather than how can we predict this event. What's
Mhm.
interesting to me when we get back to tables is there was a wonderful animation from, I think it was Dark Horse Analytics, cleaning up the table. Did you ever see this?
I haven't, but please do show me if you're able
Yeah,
to.
maybe we can pull up this GIF from Dark Horse Analytics about how you could take a table that has a typical Excel looking table, and what they do is they remove borders and they use font weight and they use headings and things like that to make this really beautiful table at the end. With the idea being that you can make beautiful tables. What's
Yes.
interesting to me, though, when I hear your description of the distinction between these two, is they're actually making a table that's for that phase two data visualization. We all complain about Excel, but Excel or Excel like spreadsheet software is messy because there's a lot there. So here, of course, is this presentation that I loved, right? You start out with this table, and what they do is they really sort of clean it up, and then they get rid of you always see this, get rid of all the lines in the table. It follows this sort of minimalist thing that's become people are real upset about on Twitter right now. Align certain kinds of values in different kinds of ways. Uh, you know, signal importance by highlighting things or spacing things out to signal the groups and things like that. And at the end of this, you've got this nicer looking thing, right? Um, but is this the kind of thing that I could explore an undifferentiated data set with? And I think that to me is immediately what I thought of when you're describing like retrospective versus um, exploratory data visualization.
Absolutely. And I'm optimizing for the widest use case. One of the things that I did, I worked at Uber previously, and I worked on their core data platform. I touched absolutely nothing that was consumer facing. My job was to make uh, other employees at Uber more empowered to be able to do their jobs.
Right.
And nobody asked me for this. I think when I came in, they just started using this base web design system, and it had this like horrible table that was like, I think I like wrote a manifesto on the ways in which this table was terrible, and I sent it to the
Right.
head of design systems, and he was like, "Do you want to make a table?" And I was like, "Yes, that's all I've
I
ever
wish
wanted."
someone had accidentally dropped that on Pastebin, that manifesto. I wish that manifesto could have lived out in the world. But anyway, continue.
I like marked up the component. I was like, "This sucks because you can't do any of these things with it, and it's terrible
Right.
for every possible use case I can
Right.
think of." Um, and I made this data table component. They decided to keep the table component that they had, and they were like, "Here, just make a new one." And we called it the rich data table component, and
Mhm.
it became the most internally used component at Uber. So every single internal
Right.
tool at Uber that needed a table was like, "Oh fuck, this table just does everything I need it to. I'm just going to use it." And all of Uber Freight's tooling leaned on that
Hmm.
table. So there was some stuff that was customer facing in the sense that fleet management was
Yep.
happening on this particular component. I don't know the details because I didn't work on any Uber Freight stuff directly, but I do know this like table component just got reused so much, and it was not something anyone ever asked for, and I was just like, we need this thing. And it's
I mean,
open
I saw
source.
the same. Oh yeah, I saw the same at Netflix with table visualizations being used broadly across. Not we didn't have one component, so and because it wasn't very good, I mean, if we had something that was very good, it would have taken over. Is what I'm trying to say. But
Yes.
but when a colleague of mine was building a dashboard for the customer service team, they leaned heavily into tables for that very reason, right? The portability, like you said, the data literacy, the broad adoption of tables really promotes that.
And another like super interesting pattern I've just noticed a ton is that almost every single tooling application is visualized either as a table itself, or each
Mm-hmm.
individual record pulled out of the table, remixed in some way as a piece of the puzzle. So it's like a single row of the table just
Yeah.
redesigned, and like you have like strings of these, like a single row, a table, a single row visualized differently, a table, and there's just so much product design that is literally just tables in various different formats.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the whole grid system within within your website, right? Like
Yeah.
there's um, it's the last part of the table, which I find very interesting, is then how you embed um, visual cues within the table, right? Because one of the reasons why people hate tables, and we're going to get into your data table at the end of this interview, we'll walk through it more explicitly. But most people have in mind a table that is sort of the default setting spreadsheet table when
Yes.
they're thinking about visualization, and they will say grudgingly, yes, I find value in this because I have used it. But they'll be grudging about it. What is exciting to me is taking the form and enhancing it, right? This is something you've done a lot. Um, I wonder, did you do much with Sparklines? Like that's a classic. Oh, we can bring Viz into a table by using Sparklines. Is that something that you're pro or anti?
I am very pro this because I think it can be incredibly powerful. It's a good summary. I can give you a direct example. I was
Mhm.
building a model manipulator for a fintech company. And basically, what they're doing is they're looking at historical data and they're trying to create a model based off of this historical data and use that model to run cash flows on relatively new data set, or with a data set with
Right.
very little history. And one of the ways in which you do this is you stratify the data and by different
Yeah.
metrics. The classic way to explain this is that you put your data in Excel and then you pivot it by some metric, and then you end up with a bunch of cohorts. Now, imagine if you could pivot the data more than once, like you could pivot it 4 different times, end up
Yeah.
with that many more layers of stratification. And then there is historical data that is associated with each line, with each stratification of this extremely large data set. And what I allowed people to do is basically pull any arbitrary set of historical data, stratify it by metrics that were meaningful.
Okay.
You could kind of see the spark line for all of these different metrics that were going to go into the model that they were going to use, and you could look at the sample size. Like if there are not enough, if the sample size is too low, that line is meaningless. You can see if the
Mhm.
line has like dramatic variation in the spark line and immediately know that
Right.
like that cohort is not good for my model. And then you kind of like select all of the cohorts that you think are valid. You can sort by sample size. Just turn off everything with the sample size below your threshold, create your model, run a cash flow. And this allows someone with like no data science skill. You can't use, like, you don't know Python, you don't know R, but you still want to specify this model, and now you
Right.
can.
I mean, that to me is that of course is the siren call of data visualization, right? And especially complex data visualization. Folks like me who love network visualization. One of the reasons why I say that is because systems are networks, and you can see the systems and the higher order effects of them. What I wonder is, once somebody has done 4 pivots, right, stratified by 4 levels, somebody has figured out some kind of statistical wizardry that they don't know that they're doing, but that's fundamentally what you're doing by doing this kind of almost graphical metaphor of turning the table over and over again.
Yes.
How do you help them to understand what they've done? We've actually got this retrospective moment, right? In two ways. One, the workflow. How did I get here? Because that's always something that gets lost as somebody does a lot of transformations. And two, where am I? Like, what do people call this? So when I communicate with people, I don't just say, well, I pressed the button 4 times and I think I got something, right? Like, how do we help people at that moment in that sort of data literacy perspective?
There are many different optimizations you can make, and I can go over the choices that I had to make for this particular example. The application that my users were all people who were extremely familiar with structured finance. This was a tool to create a cash flow model for a bunch of loans that one party might be buying from a different party in the secondary debt market.
Right.
It's like very complicated, like American structured finance stuff. What I knew was that my users understand credit metrics. A pivot in finance, in this particular area of finance, is called a strat table or a stratified table.
Right.
So I understood that they had certain jargon that they like to use. So I leaned very heavily, and I kind of like leaned into like the jargon that they were using, where I had a little place where you could add additional strat. Like you had the first version of this was a drop down that says you can strat by any metric. So you strat by FICO. FICO is a credit metric that almost everyone in America understands.
Right, sure.
Bad credit, if you have high FICO, good credit, right? Simple as shit. So you basically group all of the loans in your pool by the FICO score of the person. Now you add another metric, debt to income ratio, another thing that has been in the news. So I would hope that most people understand this. So you're grouping by FICO, and then you're grouping by debt to income ratio. So I don't need to lean on a particularly clear visualization of this because the table changes as you are stratifying. Simply the animation of it being in one state and then going into a different state is the communication method. Another thing to be careful of is if I was way too explicit, if I wasted too many pixels on explaining what was happening, it would irritate my user. Like nobody wants to be condescended to. Lean heavily on the things that you know the person you're making this for can understand. Try to make things that they might not understand. For example, Excel pivoting, because that is not something that the person who's running the analysis might care about or think about. They care about FICO and debt to income ratio. They don't care about the transformation that happened.
Yeah.
And that is the optimization that I took there.
What about workflows? Because the transformation always implies workflows. And it's something that I've been thinking about because in our product, we've got, as you know, a data table. We're trying to think about, well, once they get to a certain point, right? When any kind of more generic tool, you can have users who get to a point that's very valuable, but they really have no idea how they got there, right? There was a lot of backtracking. I feel like I'm setting you up for your career visualization, but they don't really know, did I prune this path? Did I take that path? And at the end of it, they're really happy with the results. And now they want to apply that to a similar set of data. Have you done much with workflow visualization? Do you think of it as highly aligned with table visualization?
I haven't worked a great deal in workflow visualizations. However, I do like you're touching on one of the design principles I took with the data table I designed for Uber. And that is, it was a rich data table that you could filter. And the filtering functionality was very SQL-like. Imagine SQL. Like most people don't know SQL. Most people who are using Excel don't know SQL. However, if like one of the things I have noticed people do is get someone who knows how to write SQL to write a query and then reuse that query because you know that that's useful. One of the flaws for all of the filtering UIs I've seen so far is the fact that once you apply a bunch of filters, figuring out what filters you applied is incredibly difficult. And one of the things I optimized for was when you apply a filter to the table, it should be clearly visible. And there was guidance in the design component in the design system for like where you could put this feedback loop. So as you're applying different filters to the table, you're seeing like multiple and statements strung out together at the top of the table. So you know what you did. And you also have a feedback loop. You want to remove a filter, suddenly the number of rows that you're looking at increase. And that's also incredible feedback. Um, you could potentially take a screenshot of the filters that you applied, give it to someone who knows how to write SQL,
Mhm.
ask them to write that query and just reuse
Right.
that. That's like one really good way of making this table visualization powerful.
It is interesting to me when you describe like the cost of a successful data visualization,
Mhm,
because what we have is you describe this data table being really powerful, and then what? Well, the table implies a filter panel, and
mhm,
the table implies maybe a data loader, and the table implies, and then suddenly you're building more and more UX for an application, right?
yes.
It's almost like you could genericize this to a rule that says if you haven't had to get into UX,
Mhm,
maybe that's a sign that your data visualization isn't as impactful, right? That almost you have to have that level. You have to have that level of investment with the product you're building for people to come back and say, well, this naturally implies these other things. And I think, challenges the kind of paternalistic view we have of data literacy, which is if we just educate people, then they'll finally be able to use network diagrams. And instead say, well, the reason they're not using network diagrams is because we've only showed them the network diagram and we haven't assumed the other context around it, like a table implies filters and things like that.
yeah.
What do you think? Does that resonate with you, or do you think I'm off base there?
No, I think it resonates very much. Think about the big data visualization event in the early 2010s, D3.
Oh yeah,
D3
yeah,
was like groundbreaking. And why was D3
yeah.
groundbreaking? It was groundbreaking because you're now adding a layer of user experience on top of
Right, right, right.
flat data visualization. Now you can interact with it in some ways. You can like when like the simple thing could be the user shows up on the visualization. Now you can animate certain things. I mean, you could
Mm-hmm.
technically do that with Flash, but D3 gave you the power to be able to do it more
Tied it to the DOM, tied it to a metaphor people knew and
directly.
followed standards. I mean, that was Bostock's, I think, the real value of D3 over a library like Flare,
Mhm.
or anything in sort of closed source land like ActionScript. Um, Let me ask you something about tables, though. So we go back to it, like the table is the result of show me the data, right?
Mhm.
So and you will hear people say, well, I don't trust this
Mhm.
data visualization, this bar chart or whatever. Show me the data.
Mhm.
That seems to imply that the table always tells the truth. Is that true?
I don't think so. You could simply not show all the data. That would be the easiest way. I noticed the question from Solomon, like, can you lie with charts? Can you lie with a table? You can simply not show all the data. Perhaps the data is so large that not all of
Mhm.
it is loadable in a single screen. Like you have, like Excel can support 4 million rows of data now, I believe, which is more than they were able to. But can you interact with 4 million rows of data without having some sort of visualization layer on top of it? I don't think so. And I think that's where you like one of the things I've tried to do and try to produce in a like try to ship product featuring this stuff, and it's always been very difficult, is when I have a table that exceeds a certain size, I want a histogram of each field, because that histogram gives me a summary of all the data and not just the
Right.
40 records that I'm looking at or the 40 rows of data that I'm looking at right now.
Well,
um,
if you want to lose all hope in science, sit down with a data scientist and look at how they sample their data, because
yes.
they will load it up in Jupyter notebooks and they will get 60 rows or maybe even 100 rows, and they'll kind of scroll through it and they'll kind of squint and they'll be like, okay, that looks like it's this kind of thing. Now, granted, of course, they're going to go and then use more sophisticated sampling algorithms. But the reason why Jupyter, for instance, defaults to displaying the table is because it is a sample. It's
Yes.
just not necessarily like you say, the right sample. It's not necessarily a significant sample. I think that's one of the other things that a table implies. Just like it implies filters, it has to also imply some kind of effective sampling that reflects this, like you're saying, the structure, the size, the structure, the stratification of the data. And that's not often thought of by the people who are producing these very simple tables that are used in very sophisticated applications.
Yes. And this is why I think being able to interact with a table is often really valuable. As you interact with it, you're kind of training yourself to understand what happened, and making sure that all of the actions you're taking against a table, like there's a feedback loop of you did a thing, we're going to tell you you did this thing, and we're going to tell you how it changed. Um, if there are 1 million rows and you apply a filter, then you should know the delta. There were 1 million rows, and then I applied this
Right.
filter. How many rows do I have now? Of these rows, am I interacting with only a certain set? What subset is that? This is all incredibly powerful and
I mean,
useful.
these are literally like so simple that they're linting rules, right? Like you could run these and then it would not allow you to commit this code because it
Yeah,
says this is a bad table. Lisa
yeah,
says this is a bad table and Lisa's right.
yeah.
Um, so we've talked about a bit about like your what you've been working on. Let's pull up the visualization that you produced of your career journey. So we prompt every interviewee to do a visualization of their professional journey, and that's it. That's the prompt. Because what I want to do is I want to see the difference between the ways people might visualize how their career has gone. So our last interview, Meg, she did a very sort of straightforward timeline. It was beautiful and it was very clear. This is not one of those things. So why don't you walk me through this a bit? You don't have to read every
Absolutely.
bubble, but like tell me what's going on here.
I did not make a data visualization. I made simply a visualization because I don't think there's any relevant data. Like the data here is not interesting. Anyone can see it. You can, it's very coherent. You can look on LinkedIn. You can look at the number of months or years I've spent doing any
Yeah.
one of these things. And I wanted to create a visualization that like answered the question you were asking me, and that is like you have a job. It is vaguely data visualization. Like data visualization seems to have played a role in what you're doing. How did this happen?
Right.
And I think this answers that. I got
Oh, I
into
think it does. I'm just not sure if I like the answer. You know how like kids ask questions and they don't want the truth. So
you know
maybe
the
that's
truth. Yeah. I came to the United States in 2011. I'm from India, born and raised, and I came here to go to journalism school. And when I got into journalism school, I realized that um gonna say some salty shit here now. Like I was much better at math than my cohort of colleagues at
mhm.
journalism school. And I was like, wow, it's like I can just be more impressive with a lot less effort if I focus on
Mm,
data. Because it's like apparently I can calculate percentages and this is impressive. This is like,
right.
whoa, like I discovered new things. And also another thing was that I realized I enjoyed interviewing data a lot more than I enjoyed interviewing people. People have this like they expect you to come up with follow-up questions very quickly, and I'm like, oh, ooh, that's hard. And I sound pretty stupid when I'm doing that. But with data, you can take your time,
Yeah.
ask your questions. It fit in with my brain. Um,
Right.
one of the first things I did was during journalism school, like coming out of the financial crisis, foreclosures were going crazy. And I got this like giant data dump of
Mhm.
foreclosures by like zip code in New York City. And Google Fusion Tables was a thing then. It basically allowed you
Right.
to
Right. Right.
yeah, like you could join data sets and you could there was a visualization layer on top of like Google Maps. And what I did was I created an interactive map of foreclosures in New York City over time. I made like 5 different maps or 6, maybe 10 different maps, looking at
Mhm.
foreclosure rates over time.
Sure.
And it was an interactive visualization. And it was like the most mind-blowingly impressive thing that anyone had seen. And they were like, this foreclosure map, man, like this is the shit. And I was like, people just like like me now. I can make a map and people like me. Like that very simple feedback loop.
Right, right, right.
And then I got a job as like the infographics editor at the International Business Times. There's a whole bunch of drama. If you want to Google what happened to International Business Times in 2013, I was there during that time.
Okay.
But I learned Adobe Illustrator during the first few weeks of my job there because I found that like making charts using the chart generator widget in Adobe Illustrator was the fastest way for me to produce.
Oh, really?
Yes, because my like the expectations at IB Times was that I produce at least one story per day, and the bar was much lower for me because I was
Right.
a visualization. I wasn't just a regular reporter, and I was like, "Fuck! Like, what can I do in a single day? I can't like run like these complex analyses. I can't like." I was like,
Mm.
I just got like if you can look at my bylines on International Business Times and get a sense of how many visualizations I produced in like
Oh, wow.
large quantity. They weren't very good. They were okay. Oh, I think there was this one visualization that I took 3 whole days to make. Crazy. 3
Mhm.
days. Nobody gets that the kind of time. And I was very happy with the results. And David McCandless like emailed me and asked me if I wanted to submit that visualization to the Information is Beautiful Awards.
Oh, right, sure. Did you get anything for it?
I didn't because I discovered that you had to pay $100 to enter. And that was a lot of money for someone on a journalism salary in New York City,
Mhm.
living in like Manhattan. And I was like, you know
Right.
what? They've already blogged about me. I've gotten all I want out of this. Good
Well,
enough.
so, the Data Visualization Society now runs the Information is Beautiful Awards.
Yes.
So maybe we could use our clout to introduce some kind of table category, the Lisa Memorial Table category.
I would be so into that. All the submissions would
Yeah,
be just all of my old work.
we'll follow up with that after the interview.
Nice.
But so what else? What else happened? What else? How did you get out of what doesn't sound optimal as far as sort of like being fulfilling? I think one of the things that we talked about before the interview was fulfillment, right?
Mhm.
And doing what you enjoy and what you're good at. So there must have been a part of that you enjoyed, which early in the career is just being successful, right? You can go tell your friends that I
Yeah.
have a real job, like a profession. But
Yes.
were there aspects of the data visualization that you particularly liked or didn't like?
One of the things I did not like about data visualization was the shelf life of my work. I'm
Mm,
incredibly lazy. Like you notice, I found it easier to make charts than to write stories, so that's what I
right.
did. Um, uh, I really didn't like that I would make this thing and then people would talk about it for a few days and then it would just be over. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I want the work I do to last, like partly
Yeah.
driven by laziness and partly driven by the fact that like who doesn't want their work to live on beyond
I
like
just repost pictures of my old work and say, hey, remember I did this. I did
there you
this. I
go.
did Orbis 10 years ago. Don't you people remember those beautiful maps? But you're
There-
right. No, what I'm expressing is I'm in agreement there. There is something, the digital age is all about ephemera. There's something
Yes.
particularly ephemeral though about charts and about the sort of professional data visualization and charts that are sort of the classical style of
Mhm.
boiled down for busy people to make quick decisions about or just understand quickly. Because part of that is these people are very busy. They need to understand this for 5 minutes. Really, with journalism, for the most part, it's entertain, right?
Yes.
They need to be distracted for 5 minutes by something. Numeracy is distracting, and then they throw it away. And that's not very fulfilling. Yeah.
Um, exactly. And I just wanted my work to last, which means that
Yeah.
I had to have a better value prop. Um, I had some distractions. I worked at Moody's for a couple of years, creating like Moody's first data visualization guideline was something created by my colleague Danielle Jett, who is also a product designer
Okay.
now. And I like we created their first like data visualization standards, like their best practices. I even played with like maybe working for the Philadelphia Fed and like coming up with like best practices for publishing financial visualizations. Like you see a ton of financial
Oh, that's
visualizations.
cool. Yeah.
Yeah. That ended up not being really feasible. And then I worked in media for a while where I had like apparently 80% is like statistically significant enough for them, which just like wasn't like my thing. I was like, there's no real data here. Like there's nothing for me to visualize. I'm not like my
So what were they asking you to visualize?
so basically, you would run a bunch of analyses on how a certain advertising campaign performed. And when you look
Hmm.
at the data, it's like very questionable whether anything is actually meaningful. And when you like
Yeah.
run standard statistical tests against this, you'd get like a statistical significance of like 85%, which isn't like that is considered not statistically significant in
Yeah. Just a
every
little. Just a little.
kind of maybe this is true. And I just wasn't like
Yeah.
I don't want to lie with my visualizations. And I like couldn't like reconcile with the fact that none of it felt real. I ended up like not doing anything for a while. And I got my first tech job. It was for a fintech called DVO1, where the CEO was like, "Ooh, I want a data visualization. That sounds like a cool thing to have." This is how most
Yeah.
data visualization people get their jobs.
It's true. It's so
Like
true.
some fancy person, like in Moody's, like Mike West was like the head of Moody's investor service, and he was like, "I want a data visualization," and that's how Danielle and I got hired.
So
I
so fast forward to Uber, because Uber hired a bunch of data viz people too. Was there somebody there who said, "I want a data visualization. I'm going to get Nico Belmonte and fill up on data viz people"? Because for a while there, that was the,
yes,
you know, I'm in Silicon Valley. I'm in data viz. I'm interested in the field. I go to the meetups. That was the conversation for a couple of years there. It seemed like, oh, Uber is just going to build the biggest data visualization team on earth, and they're full of all these amazing people.
I think so. That was not something that was internally driven by someone thinking it was cool. That is actually one of the exceptions. Uber happened to hire these brilliant engineers that were
Yeah.
really, really interested in visualizing Uber's data. If you like, Sean,
Okay.
he created Kepler GL, which is a
Yep.
mapping
Yep.
engine. It is open source. You can like check it
Yep.
out.
She
Um,
started a startup called Unfolded. They got bought by Foursquare, for those of you listening at home, and she's amazing. Yeah.
Uber had this famous like visualization team, and it was Sean He and a bunch of like these amazing engineers. And like Uber wasn't like specifically trying to make this happen. This particular team was like a powerhouse of engineering led design essentially. And like that was actually like they didn't actually have a lot of designers who were quite as interested in visualization. I think I was one of the first, like, I was one of the very few designers who did care about data visualization.
Interesting. So
And I,
engineers, it was mostly engineers who were really interested in data viz, but the designers were more sort of traditional, we would say.
yes, much more,
Interesting.
like, the design team was
Now
extremely,
that you mention it, I don't recall like a bunch of, I don't recall sort of people I traditionally associate with data viz design coming out of Uber or being associated with that. It was very much designer, engineers and developers. I want
absolutely.
to, because I can see,
You're kidding.
we're talking so much about tables that I wanted to give you a chance, because I know that you put together a Figma to show some of your work, so we can talk about the work in more detail, and you can maybe zero in on some of the practical aspects of it, and you know, yeah,
If I'm sharing my screen, I hope that's on the, like, the this particular map of my
yep,
journey is like online, and I'm gonna tweet it out again after this interview
absolutely.
if anyone wants to dig into
What's
it.
the give me the one line retrospective summary? Like, what is it that people should recognize out of this? If I am an early career viz person
Mhm.
in college or in my first year, or I'm just looking around, like, what is it when I look at a path like this? I guess what I'm trying to say is, it seems like a mess, and it seems like it's hard to plan for.
Yes.
And if I'm a young person who wants to get involved in data visualization, are you telling me you can't have a plan? It's a mess, and hopefully you find your way. Now go, right? Is that what you're saying, or do you think that there is a lesson to come out of here for
You're
those people?
There absolutely is a lesson. I think that you need to figure out where you can add value, and that is going to be a different answer for every single visualization person. There's a ton of data visualization people who end up in analytics because asking questions of the data is their skill, and being able to create data visualization to communicate their answers is where they're adding value. Um, you have a ton of product designers who realize that creating data experiences or using data visualization to make better UX is their superpower. Data visualization in itself is not the value add. The value add is being able to take the skill of data visualization and being able to do something powerful with it. And sorry. And what individual data visualization practitioners like how the path for them is going to depend on their core skills. My core skill was in user experience and in creating new forms, which is why I think like creating better and better, more optimized tables is actually me practicing this, practicing the skill of being able to create new forms. Like a ton of the visualization engineers tend to be able to apply different libraries that exist. And I'm going to go over to the right.
Mhm.
Very
Sure.
quickly, this was one of the worst data visualizations I ever created. It's got 110 pie charts. This is for International Business Times, and it's just fucking unreadable. Like, look at how
Did
long.
people like it? But did people like it?
Um, uh,
Did
people
it
clicked on it.
perform?
People
Yeah.
clicked on it. I got people ripped me apart in Our Data is Beautiful. This was
Right.
before it was a default sub. I think it was one of the very first people on Data is Beautiful. That's where I got all my real feedback.
Oh wow. Okay.
Somebody was really mean about this particular chart, and I cried, and then I never made another like 110 pie chart visualization again. Um,
Critical feedback works.
yes, it was I am really grateful to this person for telling me like they were like, "Oh, Lisa, you
Making me
need to make."
cry.
Yeah. It was very young.
Very healthy. This is very healthy thinking. Listen, kids at home. This is how you. So
Yeah.
let's move on to something a little less traumatic, hopefully,
I made
or
a
maybe
ton.
not, because it's a Big Mac. All right. This is the Big Mac. Is this the Big Mac? The metric for understanding how much
Yes,
people make based on how much a Big Mac costs.
absolutely. How many minutes do you have to work to earn a Big Mac?
There
Is
you
what.
go. Right.
And as you can see, you need to work a lot more in Afghanistan to buy one Big Mac, because the minimum wage is 57 cents, than you
Right.
do in Canada. Um,
Right. Right.
this was just one in a long series of like bubble map visualizations that I made with like these
Hmm.
pointers. And like I was like, oh, this thing works. Here's my key.
Yeah.
Here's how to read this chart, and here's the visualization. And
Oh,
that
what
this
an interesting form. So this form, the circle, the line is it's basically like a built-in annotation, and if it's close enough, then the annotation's right next to it. But I can see with Austria, it's pulling the line all the way out. So it's like I didn't realize that's what it was doing with the last one. That's really interesting.
it was intended as like a combination bubble chart, like an area visualization.
Hmm.
There's a little bar that's formed with it as well, and like using the same form to annotate. Like how much visual craft can you reduce while being able to do all of these things is also a thing that
Right.
I like super interested in. The wallet experiment. This map is not a very good map. It's an icon, like it's basically like an icon visualization on a map,
Hmm.
with like the worst data possible. And this
Right.
thing like goes viral every 2 3 years, and I'll get like a family member message me on WhatsApp from India to ask me like, "Is this you?" And I'm like, "Yes, it's me." It's I yeah. You make
Well,
some
at
questions.
least India scores highly on that. So
And that's why people in
at
India are
least they're
like, "I
not
love."
angry at you.
Yeah,
Right.
this is why do you think my Indian family messages me? Because they're like, "Oh, it makes us look good. This is great." Uh, then there was my okay, so this is my take on Sankey's. I was like,
Okay.
Sankey's are really hard to understand. What if I
They
combined a
are.
bar chart and a Sankey? So it's
Right.
basically results in a stacked ranked bar chart.
Right.
Um, and I went through a phase of like putting like all the data that came in. I was like, can I make this into a stacked ranked bar chart or my version
Are
of a
you
Sankey?
familiar with parallel sets?
Yes.
Yeah, so parallel sets are very much like the stacked ranked bar chart. And I mean, a Sankey is under the hood a stacked ranked bar chart, right? It's just with connectors between them because, and I love that idea of like saying, what is this thing really, right? Because like these forums, it's not like there's a pope who declares there to be only one way to do this.
Absolutely.
And did people like, what did the people think, Lisa? What did the unwashed masses, did they like your stacked? I mean, did this work?
Yes, I did not have any comments asking me what the hell was going on. If you notice, I have a ton of annotation. I explain what's happening because I like. So what I was trying to do as a journalist was be like I have to convince people to want to understand the chart, and how do I do that? Because like if you show me a chart and I can't read it immediately, unless you give me a very compelling reason to spend more time reading it, like people don't read, Elijah. Nobody reads. Like when I'm creating UIs, I don't want to lean on text to tell people what to do because people don't read. Which means you have to give people a reason to want to read. Like it has to be something that looks pretty, that like allows you to be able to find where you are. Like this is like basically like living arrangements, like where do you fall in this map, like the navel gazing.
Right.
I am a married couple with children, so
Right.
I'm here, and like why like I'm a smaller percentage than I was in the 1970s. Like there's just less of me than like how do you get people to want to read a chart was like the thing that I focused on at this.
And I mean, this is something that I've heard before and that I've used in the past, which is trying to place the reader within the data set. You know, it's something that the New York Times did a whole series of, you know, for a while there, it seemed like you couldn't get a line chart without first drawing a line chart. It was almost like a CAPTCHA kind of thing to show the line chart. Interesting, though, that you've got all these annotations here. You've got all of this, and then you're going to push away from this eventually, right?
Yes.
Like, do you feel like this is onerous? And that's and I mean, was IBT the reason why you decided to only do tables and never do annotations again?
No, I did do annotations even after. I don't think like I think IBT was incidental in my journey. I wouldn't put any credit or blame on them. I think I was gonna make a bunch of terrible visualizations, and like these are not that bad. These are just
No, not at all. Not at all.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you another one though, which is when you were talking about people don't read and people aren't going to invest in learning how to read this new visualization. We have a data visualization community that sort of self-selects for the people who were really interested in novel data visualization, right? Somebody like me wanted to understand network charts. That's why I got into them and wanted to understand them more and more. But if I'm not reflective of who the actual audience is for these things, and I'm part of the pressure to make the community, you know, more like my practice, then how do we correct for that? How do we correct for the prominence of people who are experts in data visualization being those kind of people who actually do want to put in the effort to learn how to understand these novel charts?
You have two self-selected career paths in your survey. You have people who become analysts, and they are people who would prefer to go deeper into um, analyzing the data and like finding interesting things in it and like showing their work to people who are like them. And then you have product designers who are able to be more empathetic and find it more interesting, a more interesting puzzle to be able to convince people who are not like them to be interested in the same things as them. So those are like I think illustrative of like the two different optimizations. I definitely do a lot things that are a lot more simpler today, and I think that there's beauty in that. Like I value that all of the people that I want to understand this thing more than I value being able to make something cool.
And the same, I've made that transition in my own career where it has gone from I want to make something that is cool and encodes really complex, really interesting patterns. Because I'm not saying like I want to make something that impresses people or intimidates them. I really do think, and you know, there's different viz types, but I like to focus on the network one because it's pretty straightforward because it's complex and weird. And I think that, yeah, it's really challenging to make sure that somebody actually understands this. And it's really empowering. It's really valuable. It's probably, I'd hate to say it, more valuable than doing something that was cool that nobody'd ever done before. Um, I want to transition to some other uh, subjects, but I want to give you one last chance to focus in on one thing here, and or give a real quick sort of
Um, the
review.
variation in visuals, like you can see
Mhm.
like a very strong progression from like having a lot going on to less
Yeah,
going on.
yeah, yeah.
For example, these three visualizations here are things that I did for Moody's,
Hmm.
where I was creating bespoke visualizations for them while
Yeah.
remaining within the design system that I created for them, which specified what.
Oh, interesting.
Yes, like what are the colors? Like what is the order in which colors should appear in a visualization? What are the visualization? What is the color for good versus bad? Like this is basically a visualization of like best cases versus worst case scenario for all of these like big banks in other countries, because like Moody's rates debt, like that's what they do. And like how do I create a visualization that shows you like like how do you like position the income versus like having more income means that even in the worst case scenario the red dot is on the left side of this red area.
Oh, interesting. Interesting. Sure.
And these were like only being read by very financially literate people. So all of this stuff made sense. There's a lot
Mhm.
less variance in visual design. And like the more time I spend doing this kind of stuff, the more I value not having to make decisions about color and annotation. Like there have to be
Right.
patterns. And if something that I want to do doesn't fit any of the existing patterns, then I've made a mistake or I'm not interpreting the pattern library well enough.
It's a really interesting perspective. I think we need to hear more of that. I think that that's something, that particular point there is, if you're breaking rules, then something's wrong actually.
Yeah.
And why is that? Why would that be? Let
Uh,
me let's wrap up with this. I want to talk to you about. I want to go over to the data table site and give you a chance to tell people about data table. Um,
okay. So I'm going to go over two different data tables that I've built, and one of them,
mhm,
this is for Uber. This is the rich data table for Uber, and this
mhm,
is what I call turntable, and it's for flat file. And they're optimized for very different things. I'm not going to be able to show too much detail in the flat
of
file
course.
because not all of this is public, but we do plan on open sourcing some stuff. This particular data table, there's it's open source. Anyone on this who's watching this interview, if you wanted to use this table, you are more than welcome to do so. This is the table optimized for analysis. As you can see, you've got zebra stripes. I am not focusing too much on the split between each record because this
Hmm.
table is optimized for data that is valuable in its entirety and not just a list of things.
Right. Interesting.
Yes.
And so, are
Uh,
you actively trying to reduce a person's ability to explore it that way in the
I'm
design?
so when you're looking at something, there is a certain number of visual cues that you can use to talk to that
Mhm.
person. If you waste a visual cue, if you waste visual weight on something that's unimportant, you're doing the person that's using this table a disservice. I
Right.
like as much as possible, I try to keep like every single visual choice in here, there's a reason behind it.
Mhm.
Like there's a difference in fonts because all of the string text or all of the text is visual. It has a different font than all of the numbers. The numbers are like this monospaced typewriter looking font, and all of the stuff that's not a number. For
Mhm.
example, you could have a categorical field that has numbers, or you could just have like an ID. Like look at this thing. This looks like
Mhm.
IDs. It could be all numbers, but they're not actually a number. Like you can't add them. You
I
can't.
get what you're saying. Yeah, yeah. You make the distinction between the data types. Now, can you show me some of the flat file stuff and talk to me
Yes.
about what flat file does?
Okay, so what this is turntable. This is a table that is optimized for healing bad data. So what
Mhm.
Flatfile does is we're a way for SaaS companies to accept data from their customers. So we're a SaaS company for SaaS companies. Like if at
Okay.
any
Okay. Sure.
point if your SaaS company at any point require like has to accept data from a third party, and you know what the end state of this data looks like. Like
Yep.
that thing does not change, and you're like accepting data in like such large variations and formats. We basically give you a UI and tech to transform any variance in incoming data and turn it into this like beautiful clean data that your system will always accept. And that's
And
the
I imagine tables might be important for that.
Yes, we're mostly accepting records. Every
Yeah.
single record is valuable. That's why you have
Yeah.
a line separating each individual record.
Right.
It's optimized for editability, which is why there is like there are lines between every
Oh
single
yeah.
cell. You can put arrays inside a single cell because this is representing a person and information about this person. They could have
Yeah.
multiple emails associated with them. You can see a lot of like visual indication of like what is the status of this data, like is this good data or bad data. Clearly Eunice we've got an incorrect email for her, and you can see that because it's
Mhm.
red. And you can write
Right.
all of the validation, like you can
The
program a bunch of like data validation into Flatfile. So we can automatically run these validations against any data that you accept, like any data that our SaaS customer accepts. I'm just going to pretend that's a you. And like
Sure.
just being able to contain like a little data model in a cell that your customer can interact with is incredible.
No, it's
Like,
incredible. Because, like you said, it's a little data model within a cell. Like it's
yes,
incredible. Like when we think about the sophistication you can have within this table view.
it's a little data model that you can interact with. This is
Yeah.
categorical values. I just added a country. Like you now have
That's
3 countries in there, and you just update it. You're getting like immediate visual feedback. Ooh, problem. I'm gonna turn it to a yes. Oh, but it's niche. It's probably a no. It's an unrecognized value, which is why we couldn't like process
right.
it
It's a
immediately.
lot of niche tastes.
Yes.
This is
Uh,
amazing, Lisa. This is amazing. And I mean, to see the value of this. Do you have any sparklines here? That's the last thing I'm going to ask you about it. Are there any? We got any?
This is a table that is optimized for people with that we don't want to make any assumptions about your level of skill with data. A
Uh,
Sparkline would not be my recommendation here. I cannot predict whether the person that is going to be correcting data can use a Sparkline or not.
Makes
We
sense.
may like I think we're starting to have a lot more customers that have a lot more intense use cases with
Hmm.
and I'm suddenly getting customers where the person that is correcting the data has a lot more expertise than before. So we're
Hmm.
starting to go into that area of exploration. Like if you had a Sparkline in here, you would have to have a way to modify the data feeding into the Sparkline, because the whole point of this table is that if your data is fucked up, you can unfuck it. Like
Yeah.
that's why you use this table.
Absolutely. This is
I,
incredible, Lisa. Thank you so much. This is. I invite our viewers to go explore these. If you use Lisa's table, reply to her on Twitter, at her, and show her how you're using the table. If you also made a chart with hundreds or more pie charts, then also share that with us. Lisa, this has been just spectacular. I'm really happy to have talked to you about all this. I wish we had more time. You and I, of course, will talk more, but these poor people at home won't get to hear any of it. Uh, thank you so much. Was there anything that you wanted to sort of say before we close it out?
If you have any questions for me, at me on Twitter. I'm very easily accessible on there. One of the things that I'm very interested in doing is advising people on data visualization questions that they might have, or data experience questions that they might have. So feel free to DM me.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lisa. And thank you so much, everyone who joined us. I hope you found this conversation valuable. We're going to have more and more of these. So make sure to follow Database Society on Twitter or on LinkedIn. We'll always post when these are coming up. This first series, I'm hoping to get at least 10 people interviewed. And I hope that all of them are just as thoughtful and engrossing as this one. Thank you so much, Lisa. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. Bye now.
Thanks, Elijah. See ya.
Bye.